What's going on, pool players? Here's the thing that nobody tells you about picking up a cue for your first time. There's a right way to hold it. And I'm not just talking about your hand. I'm talking about your grip, your bridge, your stance, your whole body position. Get this right, and the whole rest of your game becomes easier. Get it wrong, and you're fighting yourself on every shot.
Today, we're breaking down the complete foundation, the grip, the bridge, and the stance, step by step. Even if you've been playing for a while, I'm sure there's something in here that'll help you clean up your game. Let's get into it.
All right, let's talk about the grip. The backhand's the one doing all the work. And the first question everybody has is, where do I hold it? And that's a good question because the answer is, it depends on the shot. But there's a great starting point. So when you address the cue ball, you want to get your tip as close to the cue ball as possible without touching it. And when you do that, your forearm should be perpendicular to the ground. If you're too tight, your angle's too small, you're limiting your range of motion. You're going to get no power. If you're too far back, you start losing control. It gets too wobbly. Again, remember that the wrist pointing straight down to the ground with the forearm perpendicular to the floor is the sweet spot. For most people, this is behind the wrap. This is a wrapless cue, but don't worry about the spot specifically. Just remember the biggest part about the grip is that your forearm should be perfectly perpendicular to the floor if you can when you address the cue ball. Basically, your tip should be exactly touching the cue ball. And here's the biggest mistake most beginners make when it comes to the grip. They hold the cue way too tight. If you're white knuckling it, not only does it stiffen you up, but it makes you jerky and inconsistent. You need to make sure that you're holding it for the first couple times. I want you to try it with just your first two fingers and your thumb. Have your back two fingers off. Let the wrist loose, let the grip loose. I like to tell people, imagine you're holding a tube of toothpaste with the cap off. You need to hold it just tightly enough that it doesn't fall out of your hand, but not too tight that you're squeezing any out. And here's the part nobody talks about, the wrist. Your wrist should hinge backwards on your backswing and forward on your follow through, naturally. You don't want to force it, but you also don't want your wrist locked. Let's take a look at what happens when somebody locks their wrist versus when they just let it flow naturally. You can see the difference visually. The locked wrist stroke is short, choppy, and dies on contact. The relaxed wrist flows through the ball, and this is how you get control over the cue ball. So to recap the grip, find your natural position with the pendulum check, keep your backhand loose like you're holding a tube of toothpaste, and keep your wrist relaxed. It's that simple. But I promise you most players do at least one of these things wrong.
All right, the next piece of the puzzle is your stance. Most people completely ignore this because they feel like it doesn't matter at all, but it actually does a lot. Your stance is your foundation. If it's wobbly or off balance, your arm, your stroke, and your bridge are completely compromised. Here's how to build your stance from the ground up, starting with your feet. The first step is to find the shot line. Imagine the shot line down onto the floor and step on it with your dominant heel. So if you're right-handed, it would be your right heel. If you're left-handed, it would be your left heel. Step in with your opposite foot and place your cue down on the shot line. When you're down in your stance, your weight should be distributed 50-50. Don't be too worried about this, as long as you're comfortable and relaxed in your stance. A common mistake new players make is they put their feet too close together, so make sure they're wide enough to remain stable. Let's talk about body position and how low to get. Once you've stepped into your shot, sit back on your hips and get your chin as close to your cue as possible with your dominant eye over the cue. Now that we're in our stance, let's put it together with our stroke arm. We already covered the pendulum in the grip section. Make sure that your upper arm does not move, only your forearm. To test this, place a piece of chalk on your upper arm and try to hit a shot without it falling off.
All right, now let's talk about what I think might be the most important part of this video, your front hand or your bridge. If your bridge is sloppy, loose, or unstable, it doesn't matter how good your stroke is, you're going to be inaccurate. There are two main bridges every player needs to learn, the open bridge and the closed bridge. I'm going to teach you both and then show you where and when to use each. For beginners, I always recommend starting with the open bridge. This is because it's the easiest to learn, but it also shows you the imperfections in your stroke, so you want to address those earlier rather than later. First, lay your hand flat on the table with your fingers spread wide open. We want a big, stable base for this one. Next, slide your thumb up next to your index finger. Make sure there's a deep V between your thumb and the knuckle of your index finger. The standard shot should be in the center of the cue ball, so if you need to, cup your hand or flatten your hand out to raise and lower your tip. As a side note, make sure your backhand isn't up too high, that way you can keep the cue level when striking through the cue ball. The key to a good open bridge is keeping the thumb and index finger as tight as possible. This prevents the cue from sliding side to side and giving you an imprecise shot. Next, let's talk about the closed bridge. This one has some advantages because it prevents your shaft from moving side to side and up and down. giving you more precise tip position of your cue. The drawbacks of this bridge are that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to learn, and it can create some friction between the shaft and your fingers, but by practicing more often and wearing a pool glove, you can mitigate both of these factors. To perform the closed bridge, we're going to start the same way as the open bridge by placing our hand flat on the table and spreading our fingers to create the strong base. Next, loop your index finger around the shaft, touching your thumb, and then press both of these fingers up against your middle finger. This creates more friction between the shaft and your fingers, but also gives you a better guide rail. You want the contact point between your index finger and thumb to create that V shape that we created earlier with the open bridge, but now you have your whole hand guiding the shaft of the cue. Like I said, this might feel uncomfortable at first, but give it a whole week of practice and it'll start to feel natural. The last thing we need to talk about is how to bridge when the cue ball is on or near the rail. You can't use your normal bridge when the ball is that close to the cushion, so here's what you do. If you have space between the cue ball and the rail, you can bridge with your cue resting on the rail. To do this, you're going to take the peace sign, put one finger on either side of the shaft, and tuck your thumb inside the shaft, guiding it with your index finger and your thumb. If the cue ball is frozen to the rail or nearly frozen to the rail, you got to put your fingers as far back on the wood as possible and use the V from your open bridge to be just barely above the edge of the wood. Then we want to hit only on the center line of the cue ball and use only the part of the cue ball that is given to us. Don't try to jack up and hit directly into the middle of the cue.
All right, we know that was a lot of information, but here's an easy drill to help you start finding your fundamentals. All right, for this drill, it's pretty simple. We just put the cue ball in the middle of the table and an object ball 1 diamond off the pocket. And all we're working on here are our fundamentals. So our grip, our stance, and our bridge. So all you gotta do is step into the shot correctly, get down, get your bridge set up, nice loose grip, and just stroke through the ball. If you can make 10 in a row, that's pretty good. If you can't, keep going until you can, and then we'll move on to the next drill.
And that's the complete foundation, your grip, bridge, and stance. Focus on these fundamentals for your next few practice sessions and just worry about the basics.
If you found this video helpful, like the video and subscribe to the channel. We upload new content every week here on the Pool House.
See you in the next one.